Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. We are here today to announce charges in 5 cases which are part of an ongoing investigation against multiple men across Pennsylvania for sexually assaulting children. Sadly, this is not the first time that I've stood here and talked about this. Last October, our office announced similar charges against 5 separate men. And then in February, I stood before you and announced charges against 4 additional men. This is the 3rd press conference of this nature, which we've held in 3 different areas of the Commonwealth. As I said, this abuse happened across the Commonwealth. Since last fall, we have charged 14 individuals connected to the same religious organization, the Jehovah Witnesses, as part of this ongoing investigation into child sexual abuse. Of those 14 that we previously arrested, all of them are pending trial, and their cases are at different points in the criminal justice system, but for one individual who took his own life when our agents were attempting to apprehend him. As I have said before, the details of these cases that I will be talking about are incredibly disturbing. The 5 defendants that we have charged today were all adults in positions of trust with these victims. And they violated that trust and they abused these children. Children are some of our most vulnerable members of society, and they should be nurtured and protected. But instead of protecting these children, the defendants violated and abused them. I can assure you that my office remains steadfast in the commitment to investigate, prosecute, and hold accountable individuals that prey on children. And while these 5 cases have their own set of facts and circumstances and different victims, there are common factors. All 5 men had the trust of the victims and their families. And all 5 men were members of the Jehovah Witness congregation, and many of them gained access to their victims through this organization. These cases were presented to an investigative grand jury, and the grand jurors heard the evidence, they heard testimony, they considered and weighed it, and they made a recommendation to charge all 5 defendants. I'm going to go through the details now of each individual case. First, David Belosa, 62, of Philadelphia. It is alleged that this defendant sexually assaulted a young girl whom he had met through the Jehovah Witnesses community when she was 4 years old and he was 35. He became close to the victim's family and his congregation after moving to the United States. The victim's family welcomed him. They even let him stay in their home. And that is how he got to know the victim. The victim became friendly with him. And one evening, she went down to the basement to visit with him. And when she did that, he took that opportunity to pull her onto his lap and sexually abuse her. Before she went up from the basement, he told her not to tell anyone. He's been charged with aggravated indecent assault, and corruption of minors. The second case, Earl William Hall, 50 years old, of Alden, Delaware County. Hall, who was 41 years old at the time, was an elder in the Jehovah Witness congregation. Through his position of authority and trust, he became close with his victim, a 16-year-old girl. Hall would often give this young victim a ride to and from school. On numerous occasions, he inappropriately touched her without her consent. Hall has been charged with indecent assault and corruption of minors. The third case is Sean Sheffer, 45, of Butler County. In that case, the grand jurors heard testimony describing Sheffer's sexual assault of a young girl who was just 7 years old when the abuse started. He was 18 at the time. Sheffer had a familial relationship with this victim and often was alone with her in her home without her parents' supervision. It was during these times that he repeatedly raped and assaulted this young girl. The victim testified that the defendant raped her 50 to 75 times till she was 12 years old. He has been charged with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, and corruptions of minors. The next case is Terry Booth, 57 years old, of Panama City, Florida. Through a Jehovah Witness congregation in Allegheny County, Booth became a mentor to a 16-year-old boy who ultimately turned out to be his victim. Through this mentorship, he spent extended periods of time alone with the boy, during which time he groomed his victim. He was 44 at the time, and he was engaging this victim in inappropriate sexual conversations. And on at least one occasion, that conduct escalated into inappropriate touching without the victim's consent. Booth is charged with indecent assault and corruption of minors. Finally, Luis Ala Velezda, 55, of Reading. He abused a young family member of his for several years, beginning when she was 12 years old and he was 34. The grand jury heard testimony from the victim, who stated that for years he would sneak into her bedroom while she was sleeping and sexually assault her. Years later, when the victim was an adult, he raped her again in his home. He has been charged with rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, endangering the welfare of children, and corruption of minors. I have to say that I am thankful to the courageous survivors involved in these cases who were willing to share the horrific abuse that they went through. I'm inspired by their strength. Many of these incidents and offenses happened a long time ago, even decades ago. But as a long-time child abuse prosecutor, I can tell you that the trauma endures for these victims. And for these survivors to have the courage and the willingness to pursue justice against their abusers is truly brave and remarkable. Recounting these events surely was not easy, and the process will not be easy. The Office of Attorney General and the victim support will be there. I also want to thank the grand jurors. We appreciate the service of the independent citizens who make up the grand jury. They participate in the process, and in this case, they reviewed all the evidence, they heard painful testimony, and they reached their own determination about the evidence and returned these charges. And of course, I would like to thank the Office of Attorney General and the incredibly talented team that worked on this case. Executive Deputy Attorney General Michelle Walsh, who is with me, Chief Deputy Attorney General Ron Eisenberg, Chief Deputy Attorney General Chris Jones, Special Agent Jimmy Mamua, Steve Adams, and Christina Hingston. They're here behind me, and they have done extraordinary work. I would also like to give a special thanks to our partners in law enforcement, the Bay County Sheriff's Office, and the U.S. Marshals who assisted us in the apprehension of the individuals. I will say that this office will never stop working to bring justice to those who have been victimized, and we will continue to investigate and prosecute anyone who harms the most vulnerable members of our community. Finally, I would like to thank the members of the media that are here today and have been here for covering these allegations and shedding more light on the horrors of child sexual abuse in this community. After the previous press coverage from the announcements that I had talked about earlier, victims came forward and shared their stories. So getting the word out is incredibly important. And so in closing, I am asking anyone with information regarding allegations of sexual assault related to this case, please contact our office. Our hotline is 888-538-8541. Please reach out. These tips can make a world of difference. Thank you.
Madam Attorney General, what do you know about what the Jehovah Witness leadership knows about this problem within its ranks?
What I can tell you, and I've discussed the prior announcements that we've made, that in these cases, and obviously that's the focus, we've charged 14 individuals. All of them, at the time of the sexual assaults, were Jehovah Witnesses, and many of them gained access to their victims through this. These cases are ongoing.
Is there a special investigative effort by the Attorney General's office that's focused on Jehovah's Witnesses, and if so, was it kicked off by the victims coming forward, or did you find the victims as part of that initial investigation?
This case came to us as a resource referral, and it's an ongoing investigation involving child abuse.
Are any of these cases like these 14 cases that you prosecuted over the last few months?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning.
Are any of those cases linked? You said there's 14 from the Jehovah's Witness Church, and then these 5 also from the Jehovah's Witness Church. So are any of them linked?
Well, in terms of these cases are all separate cases. In other words, in these situations, in all the cases that we've announced, we've arrested individuals, we've arrested men who have preyed on children and sexually abused them. They're separate and distinct. There is a common thread that I've mentioned. One is the gaining of trust of the victims. The second is that they all were Jehovah Witnesses and part of the congregation at the time of the abuse and gained access to the victims through that.
Is there anything in your investigation that's showing a problem with culture, like we experience in the Roman Catholic Church with priests? Is there anything that's showing that it reaches that extent?
Look, I can't talk beyond what we've discussed today and in the previous cases. I do encourage you, as I said, I went over these cases in very brief detail. I encourage you to look at the presentments.
I'll just ask you, do you have any evidence that the Jehovah Witness, as an organization, as a church organization, has met with any of the families, offered payment or counseling in the same way that the Catholic Church has?
I can't comment on that.
Yeah, so you ended your statement saying that offering a number to call for more victims. Do you expect more victims to come forward?
Well, if history teaches us anything, yes.
Did you mention that the first victim was an immigrant? Where are the child from?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry. The first victim, you mentioned that was an immigrant, right? What country was from the family?
You may have misunderstood. The defendant in that case came from another country to the United States. Sure.
Would there be an investigation or report done on the church itself?
I can't comment on that at this time.
Did any of these victims come forward at the time of the abuse, and was there a cover-up or a blind eye turned on behalf, by the church hierarchy?
Look, I can't comment on that beyond the detail that's contained in the presentments.
Are any of these cases from the same congregation, the same church?
I don't believe so, no.
Do you know whether any of these folks who you've charged here, do they know each other?
I don't know that.
So all of these 5 here, you bring these cases because the victims step forward in every single case.
Look, some of the cases we've had victims come forward, and some, as I mentioned, came as a result of our press conferences and talking about these cases. In other cases, we've obviously been looking at a variety of different types of evidence and have uncovered some of this abuse that way.
Does it seem like more people are starting to be more comfortable with stepping forward and sharing what happened to them? Because when we hear of all the press conferences, you ask the question, is it happening more often, or are people stepping forward more often?
That's a great question. I truly believe that victims become more comfortable coming forward when they know they're not alone. So that's true of, I think, any cases of child abuse.
But again, on these 5 cases, though, were they all generated from the prior press of your prior cases?
Not all of them, no.
Last question?
I was talking to somebody recently just about religion, and all we would ever hear about is the cases against the Catholic priests. But they mentioned that this obviously happens in all kinds of faith. Can you talk about just the the grooming that faith leaders or people of this group do to find their victims, get their victims?
Look, I can just say generally, as a longtime child abuse prosecutor, unfortunately, this exists everywhere. And one of the key pieces to child abuse is that the offenders have to have access to their victims. They have to have a way in order to get to them and groom them. And so there's a variety of umbrellas that can fall under. And unfortunately, religious organizations is one of them, but certainly not the only one. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Going through the 5 cases, I remember you mentioned one is an elder. Is the other 4, are they just member of the church, or do they hold any positions in the church in the other 4 cases?
Yeah. The other 4 were just members. And again, I would encourage you to read the presentments. There's a little bit more detail than I've had time to talk. But thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Madam Attorney General, you've arrested all these folks? You're holding every one of them? Are you looking for any of them?
So as it stands right now, 4 of them have been arrested, and bail has been set on those 4 cases. And on the 5th case, we're attempting to arrest him.
And which one is that?
That's Belosa.
Is he still in the country?
I can't comment any further on that. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.